The heat was a physical thing, a shimmering curtain that distorted the endless steel lines vanishing into the bleached horizon of the Utah desert. It pressed down on the rail yard, baking the creosote out of the ties and making the air taste of rust and failure. At the center of this simmering purgatory stood the reason for the assembly of anxious minds and expensive equipment, Unit 8448, the Titan, a G-Evolution series locomotive, 6 axles and 4,400 horsepower of the most advanced diesel-electric power on the planet. And it was dead. Not just stalled, but inert, a 400,000-pound monument to technological impotence. It blocked the Union Pacific's Central Corridor, the main artery pumping lifeblood into the nation's logistics network. For 6 agonizing hours, it had been a steel dam against a river of commerce and, more critically, a stalled military consignment of immense strategic importance just a few miles down the line. The man in charge of fixing it, Chief Engineer Mark Rourke, was built like a retired linebacker, with a florid face and a booming voice accustomed to being the loudest in any room. Right now, that voice was scraping the edge of panic. He paced in front of the silent behemoth, his polo shirt stained dark with sweat, barking at a team of cowed technicians huddled over laptops that glowed with cascades of red error codes. They were the best in the business, flown in on a priority charter, and they had nothing. They had cycled the power, rebooted the onboard command module, and run diagnostics that could map the DNA of a fly from 50 yards. The Titan remained a corpse. Standing just beyond the periphery of the frantic activity, almost camouflaged against a stack of discarded pallets, was an old man. His name was Elias Vance, and his official purpose there was custodial. He pushed a wide broom with a slow, rhythmic sweep, collecting dust devils and stray gravel into small, tidy piles. His face was a roadmap of seasons spent in the sun and wind, his eyes a pale, washed-out blue that seemed to see through the shimmering heat and into the very bones of the machine. He didn't watch the men, he watched the engine. He saw the way the heat haze trembled differently over the hydrostatic transmission housing, a subtle distortion that spoke a language the laptops couldn't comprehend. He had been a ghost in this yard for years, a quiet fixture who took the late shift, a man whose past was a closed book no one had ever bothered to open. To the rotating crews of young, ambitious engineers, he was just Eli, the old janitor who kept to himself. Rourke slammed his hand against the Titan's massive fuel tank with a clang that made his own men jump. "Useless! A 200-ton paperweight!" he roared, his fury a desperate shield for his own humiliation. His gaze swept the yard and landed on Elias, who had paused in his sweeping, his focus locked on the undercarriage of the locomotive. The old man took a half-step forward, his brow furrowed in concentration, as if trying to hear a whisper in a hurricane. The movement, small as it was, drew Rourke's fire. "What are you gawking at, Pops?" he yelled, the sound echoing in the unnatural quiet. "You got a brilliant idea? Maybe you're gonna sweep the problem away?" A few of the younger techs snickered nervously. Elias offered no reply. His gaze didn't waver from the engine. He simply straightened up, the moment of inquiry passing, and gave a slow, almost imperceptible shake of his head before pulling his broom back. He retreated into the background, his shoulders slightly stooped, becoming once more a part of the scenery. But one man had seen the entire exchange without comment. General Matheson, a 2-star from Military Logistics Command, stood near a dusty service truck, his arms crossed over his chest. His uniform was crisp despite the heat, but his face was carved with a stony impatience. He had seen Rourke's bluster, he had seen the technician's failure, and he had seen the brief, dismissive cruelty aimed at the old man. And now, he was watching the clock, knowing that with every tick, a vital national security asset was sitting vulnerable on an open track. The problem was no longer just mechanical, it was becoming a crisis. Matheson's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. He wasn't just watching the engine anymore. He was watching everyone. The technicians, spurred by Rourke's venom, rallied for another assault. This time, they bypassed the primary diagnostics and attempted a direct interface with the traction motor inverters, a risky procedure that was the digital equivalent of open-heart surgery. A young engineer named Davis, his face pale with concentration, plugged a fiber optic cable into a port sealed behind a heavy plate. "Initializing force diagnostic reboot, Chief," he called out, his voice tight. Rourke grunted, pacing like a caged bear. "Just do it. If it fries the board, we'll get another board. We need this thing moving yesterday." On the laptop screens, lines of code scrolled at a dizzying speed. For a tantalizing second, a few of the red error indicators flickered to amber. A collective breath was held. Then, a sharp pop emanated from an electrical cabinet on the locomotive, followed by the acrid smell of burnt insulation. Every light on the diagnostic panel flashed red simultaneously before the screens went black. One of the expensive laptops was completely dead. The Titan, for its part, hadn't so much as twitched. A groan of despair went through the team. Rourke's face purpled. He rounded on Davis. "You fried it! You fried a $2 million inverter control unit!" The young engineer flinched, stammering. "No, sir, I followed the protocol exactly. It must have been a power surge from the—" Rourke cut him off. "Protocol? Your protocol just set us back another 12 hours. It's the manufacturer's fault. Shoddy wiring. Cost-cutting garbage." He was spiraling, blaming everyone and everything to avoid the cold, hard fact that he was beaten. From his vantage point, Elias had watched the whole thing. He hadn't needed to see the laptops to know it would fail. He was watching the locomotive's ancillary generator unit. Just before the pop, he'd seen the faintest shudder in its housing, a micro-vibration that signaled a system under conflicting orders, tearing itself apart. It was peculiar, but in the chaos of the moment, Davis dismissed it and hurried back to the wrath of his boss. General Matheson's satellite phone buzzed. The call was short, the voice on the other end devoid of pleasantries. The update he had to give was grim. When he disconnected, the granite composure of his face had cracked. The veins on his temple stood out. He strode directly to Rourke, his boots crunching on the gravel with military finality. "Chief," he said, his voice low but carrying the weight of command, "your window of opportunity has closed. I want a solution." The threat was unspoken but absolute. Careers ended over delays like this. Rourke, now sweating from fear as much as heat, turned his frustration into a weapon against his own subordinates. "You heard the general," he bellowed at the exhausted team. "Did you run the full thermal diagnostic on the prime mover? Or did you just use the quick check you run on your pickup trucks? I want every sensor recalibrated. I want every line bled. I want this engine stripped down to the frame if you have to." The engineers, weary and demoralized, scattered to perform redundant tasks they knew would yield nothing. Rourke was just making noise, a desperate attempt to look busy for the general. From across the yard, hidden in the long shadow of a water tower, Elias watched the pointless frenzy. He leaned on his broom, the rough wood familiar in his hands. A lifetime ago, he had held tools far heavier, in conditions far worse. He'd learned then that a machine, like a man, has a spirit. It has a voice. And the Titan was screaming, but everyone was too busy shouting to listen. He murmured to the dry air, a whisper lost in the breeze. "It's not the brain. It's the heart. It can't breathe." Unseen by Elias, the young engineer, Davis, had been sent to fetch a heavy torque wrench from a distant tool locker. On his way back, he passed just behind the old man and caught the strange, quiet words. "It can't breathe?" The phrase was poetic, nonsensical. He glanced at the locomotive's massive air intakes, which were clear. It didn't make any sense. Yet, the old man's certainty was unsettling. It planted a seed of doubt in his mind, not about the engine, but about the man they were all ignoring. The sun began its slow descent, painting the western sky in hues of orange and violet, mocking the failed efforts on the ground. The air cooled slightly, but the atmosphere in the yard had grown frigid with defeat. Rourke's team had exhausted their playbook. Their expensive equipment lay scattered around the Titan like the abandoned weapons of a beaten army. Laptops were closed. Tool chests were being consolidated. Rourke was on the phone with corporate headquarters, his voice a low, defeated drone, negotiating the Herculean logistics of bringing in a heavy haul crane to lift the dead engine off the tracks. It was an admission of utter failure, a solution that would take days and cost a fortune. The general stood apart, his back to the scene, looking down the tracks where his priority cargoes sat waiting. The silence was heavy, thick with the weight of consequence. This was the moment. For Elias, the world narrowed to a single point of decision. He could finish his shift, punch his time card, and go home. He could let them bring in the cranes. No one would ever know he might have held the answer. It was the safe choice, the path of least resistance he had walked for decades, content in his anonymity. But as he looked at the magnificent, paralyzed engine, he didn't see a machine. He saw a promise. He saw the face of a young, terrified lieutenant in the snows of Korea, his radio crackling with desperation as his men ran low on ammunition. Elias, then a boy of 19 in a corporal's stripes, had been tasked with getting a supply train over a bombed-out trestle. The engine had failed. The experts had given up. But Elias had listened to the machine, and in the freezing dark, with nothing but a wrench and a prayer, he had found its voice. He had made a silent vow that day. Never again would he stand by and let good men fail because a machine had lost its way. He took a slow, deep breath, the desert air filling his lungs. He carefully leaned his broom against the wall of the small custodian's shed. His choice was made. He would not stand by. Not this time. With a resolve that seemed to straighten his spine and erase years from his posture, Elias Vance walked out of the shadows. He moved not with the shuffling gait of an old man, but with the steady, measured pace of someone with a purpose. In his right hand, he carried a single tool, a long, S-shaped wrench, its steel a dark, non-reflective gunmetal gray, worn smooth from a lifetime of use. It was not a tool from the yard's well-stocked sheds, it was his own. His approach did not go unnoticed. Rourke, his face a mask of weary disgust, saw him coming. "Oh, for the love of security!" he yelled, waving a dismissive hand. "Get this fossil out of my containment zone! He'll probably trip and sue us. Get him out of here, now!" Two burly yard security guards started to move towards Elias, their expressions apologetic but firm. Elias didn't stop. His pale blue eyes were fixed on General Matheson. Before the guards could reach him, the general's voice cut through the air like a command on a battlefield. "Hold!" It was one word, spoken without volume, but it stopped the guards in their tracks. Matheson turned his full attention to the approaching janitor. He had seen everything else fail. He had witnessed the hubris, the technology, the utter collapse of modern expertise. What was left to lose? Desperation had made him open to a miracle. "Let him be," the general said, his voice softer now. He looked at Elias, taking in the ancient wrench, the determined set of his jaw. "You see something, son?" The term of address was startling, a strange and sudden baptism of respect that hung in the air. Elias stopped a few feet from the general, his gaze steady. He had finally been seen. He had been heard. Elias inclined his head respectfully toward the general, deliberately ignoring the fuming chief engineer. "Permission to inspect the pressure bleed-off valve on the main hydrostatic transmission, sir," he said, his voice surprisingly clear and steady. It held a quiet authority that was utterly at odds with his humble uniform. "The new sensor packages are sensitive. Sometimes, under extreme heat, a vapor lock in the transmission fluid can form. The computer reads the resulting pressure spike as a catastrophic seizure of the main drive shaft. It shuts everything down as a precaution. It thinks it's protecting the engine, but it's just choking it." Rourke let out a short, derisive laugh. "A vapor lock? In a closed-loop hydrostatic system? That's archaic. That's something from a 1950s textbook. This system is monitored by 1,000 redundant sensors. It would." The general silenced him with a glacial stare. "He has a theory, Chief. That's more than you've given me in 6 hours. Proceed, Mr. Vance." He had given Elias a name and a title. Elias nodded once, then knelt by the side of the massive locomotive. His movements were economical, fluid, devoid of the hesitation and stiffness of his years. He slid under the engine's belly, disappearing from the knees down. The assembled engineers watched, a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity on their faces. They saw an old man crawling under a machine with a wrench, a scene from a forgotten era. Elias, however, was in his element. He ignored the thick bundles of neatly zip-tied fiber optic cables and color-coded wiring harnesses. His calloused fingers, sensitive as a surgeon's, trailed over the warm steel, feeling for vibrations, for temperature variances the thermal cameras had missed. He was reading the engine skin. His hand stopped on a small, grimy, unassuming housing, no bigger than a fist, tucked away behind a coolant manifold and covered in a layer of baked-on dust. It was the manual override for the pressure equalization valve, a piece of mechanical redundancy so old and reliable it wasn't even wired into the main diagnostic system. It wasn't on the digital schematics. To the computer, it didn't exist. He slid the S-shaped wrench from his belt. The unique curve of the tool allowed him to reach the recessed nut perfectly. As he fitted the tool, the sight was cinematic, the worn, dark steel of the old wrench against the gleaming, high-tech alloy of the locomotive. It was the past laying its hands on the future. Elias settled his weight, gripping the wrench with both hands. He didn't apply brute force. He closed his eyes, his entire being focused on the single point of contact between the tool and the nut. He was listening with his hands, feeling the story of the metal. He began to apply slow, steady pressure. For a moment, nothing. The nut was frozen tight. Rourke smirked, ready with an "I told you so." But Elias held the pressure, not increasing it, but maintaining it, letting the energy seep into the threads. He felt it. A microscopic give, a tremor of surrender running up the wrench and into his arms. Now he turned. It was a precise, controlled arc, a quarter turn, no more. The effect was instantaneous and electrifying. A loud, sharp hiss erupted from the valve, a sudden, violent exhalation of trapped, superheated air. It was the sound of a giant, held breath being released. This was followed by a deep, resonant clank from within the locomotive's core, the sound of a massive locking pin retracting, of a mechanism freeing itself. A profound shudder ran the entire length of the Titan's frame. Inside the silent cab, a single indicator light on the main control panel, dark for hours, flickered to life. It glowed a steady, healthy green. A low growl started deep in the engine's chest, the sound of the diesel prime mover tentatively turning over. The growl deepened, catching, and then swelling into the thunderous, earth-shaking thrum of 4,400 horsepower roaring to life. A plume of dark smoke shot from the exhaust stack, clearing into a steady, clean haze. The Titan was alive. It settled into a powerful, rhythmic idle, its immense power once again leashed and ready. The silence of failure was shattered, replaced by the triumphant song of the machine. An absolute, stunned silence fell over the technicians, a vacuum of disbelief in the heart of the engine's roar. They stared, mouths agape, first at the locomotive, then at the diagnostic laptops that had suddenly, miraculously, sprung to life, their screens a sea of green system nominal indicators. Chief Engineer Rourke was frozen in place, his face a grotesque mask of shock, his arrogance dissolving into raw, public humiliation. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. The world as he knew it had just been turned upside down by an old man with a wrench. General Matheson walked forward, his eyes wide, not with simple surprise, but with the dawning, staggering light of recognition. He watched as Elias Vance slid out from under the engine and slowly rose to his feet, wiping a smear of grease from his cheek with the back of his hand. The general looked from the purring, vibrant machine to the calm, unassuming face of the old man. "I've seen hands like that before," Matheson said, his voice quiet, almost reverent, yet it carried over the engine's thrum. "And a touch like that. I read about it once. In a field report from the Chosen Reservoir campaign. A combat railway engineer they called the ghost of the line. They said he could coax a dead engine back to life with a length of baling wire and sheer force of will. He kept the supply trains moving when the 3rd Infantry was cut off and freezing. Saved hundreds of lives. His file said his name was Vance. He paused, his eyes searching the old man's face. They lost track of him after the war. Presumed he took a quiet desk job somewhere until retirement. Elias met the general's gaze. There was no pride in his eyes, only a quiet acknowledgement of a past he had never spoken of. Elias Vance, sir. He confirmed, his voice steady. I was a corporal then. The name, the confirmation, struck General Matheson with the force of a physical blow. He was standing in the presence of a living legend, a hero forged in the crucible of a forgotten war, a man whose institutional knowledge had been written off as obsolete, and who had just been sweeping the floors. The general drew himself up to his full height, his posture radiating a newfound respect that bordered on awe. His voice boomed across the yard, sharp and clear over the engine's idle, for all to hear. Corporal Vance, he declared, the old rank now an honorific. You have just provided a master class in competence, humility, and duty. A lesson that this command, and frankly, this entire generation of engineers, desperately needed to learn. He then turned, his face hardening as he fixed his gaze on the pale, trembling figure of Mark Rourke. Chief! The general's voice dropped, becoming cold and sharp as chipped ice. You and your colossal ego are hereby relieved of command. You will pack your personal items. A car will be here in 20 minutes to escort you to the regional headquarters, where you will await a full and formal inquiry into your leadership and conduct. Rourke simply nodded, utterly broken. The other engineers, including young Davis, looked from their disgraced boss to Elias, their expressions transformed from skepticism to something approaching worship. Davis stepped forward and hesitantly offered Elias a clean bottle of water. Thank you, sir, he said, the sir imbued with a profound sincerity. Elias took the bottle with a simple nod of thanks. There was no hint of triumph on his face, no gloating I told you so. His work was done. The machine was healed. The promise was kept. He turned, placing his ancient, faithful wrench back into a simple canvas bag, and began to walk away, his purpose fulfilled. General Matheson watched him go, a humble giant disappearing into the twilight. In that moment, the general understood a fundamental truth. True mastery wasn't found in a digital readout or a complex schematic. It was found in wisdom, in experience, and in a quiet dignity that sought no reward beyond the work itself. The story of what happened in that Utah rail yard that day would travel, whispered first, then told openly, becoming a legend in its own right, a powerful, thrumming reminder that the greatest strength is often hidden in the last place you think to look.